Hello, Nicole. Hmm. Hoping other people will continue to try. That took me a few goes to get that on. Right. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and begin, and I will keep looking at the participants uh, part on here to make sure that I have everyone down. So each time you do this, I'm going to give you a few extra credit points for coming. But no one is deducted any points for not coming. I understand some people have to work, etc., and this doesn't work with their schedule. All right, and so all right, I'm hoping that I'm going to share the screen. I'm hoping that you guys had an opportunity to look at the sample that I had written with number one, and just to kind of gauge what I'm looking for. And on these, right, remember that every every number that I put together, it represents like an interesting point that I've read from a book or that I've heard in lecture from a professor, and so it's never intended to be the definitive word on that topic. It's just to get your critical thinking, going, and also to show you a broader array of perspectives on the same subject, which you would do if you ended up being a history major. And yeah, all right. And so with number one, you notice it says right that in reality that science can only get us so far. So it's kind of the granted but approach, and we say, okay, we have several impressive scientific methods to be able to try to infer, right, to make logical conclusions from the facts that we believe we can ascertain, uh, certain truths about Native Americans long before Columbus came. So I mentioned some of them, right, and how they are used to measure certain things. So thermal luminescence is with when something was heated, as far as pottery, uh, carbon 14 dating, looking for the C14 that is left in an organism. You have tree ring dating. You have suboceanic isotope analysis to be able to discern ice ages. You have pollen analysis, and so you have some impressive things that we use. Stratigraphy is you get down to a level of dirt from the erosion in years, and then it hits hardpan or limestone or something that keeps it from further eroding. And if it has the same organic uh, organic, composition, the same amount of like sodium and nitrate and so forth. You could infer that all of those things at that same level underground were contemporary with each other. And so we have ways of inferring, right? But then what I do is I try to poke holes in several of those methods and show how in certain circumstances those methods are not of much help at all, or they could even lead to erroneous conclusions, right? So tree ring dating, the trees have to be sensitive and not complacent. Uh, Certain things with the barometric pressure in the atmosphere can, with nuclear energy, et cetera, can change uh, fundamental variables in trying to discern carbon 14 and mess that up. And the list goes on and on. So at any rate, then the most popular, right? The most popular theory was that by C. Vance Haynes about 13,000 years ago, there was the latest Wisconsin era ice age, and that's when the Native Americans came from Siberia in the western steppes of Asia, across the Bering Sea on land, or on ice, and um, and came through the ice-free corridor. Supposedly, there's evidence for two big glacial sheets, and there was a gap between them through Canada. So it made sense, right? But then they found carbon dated material, if the carbon dating could be uh, trusted, in Monteverde, Chile, in Brazil, that dated to 30,000 years ago instead of just 13. Then when they looked at the ice-free corridor between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, there's not much of a carbon footprint. Evidence of humans having traversed through there, stopped to, hunt, etc. Not a lot of evidence there. So I'm highlighting the weaknesses, right, of these methods and just saying that we can't trust it. There's only so much that science can do. Okay. So that's what I was looking for with number one. All right. So like I said, each one has a definitive thesis. And number two, right, is I meant to be pretty upfront, if you've had the chance to read it, is that the whole, Bartolome de las Casas, he wrote a book called A Brief History of the Destruction of the Indies, because they called the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere the Indies, right, as a misnomer. And it took the Europe by storm. He said basically that his fellow Spaniards came as lions and tigers and looking for whom they could devour, and he likened the Native Americans to ovejas mansas, meek sheep. Okay, and contended that they were the innocent victims. Okay, and so with that, however good his intentions were, uh, it kind of set the stage not just for a movement of human rights for the Native Americans, which of course was in their favor, but it also had a negative side to the coin, and that was is you had a very um, paternalistic, right? Like we are the father figure, and we're going to teach you children how to live properly in a civilized society. It also led to a very paternalistic rationalization of taking over the Native Americans, that they couldn't create culture and civilization themselves, and the Spaniards needed to teach them how to do so. So it's a very convenient stereotype, right? Thus, you're justifying their conquest and their colonization of the Americas. And I'm saying that that depiction of the Native Americans was not only manipulatively convenient for the Europeans, but it also was historically false, right? That they were not just these noble savages, as they would say a century later in the Enlightenment, that they're like childlike and they don't know what greed and other vices like that are all about because they're still living like innocent children. So at any rate, then what I try to do is I try to set the stage for Europe's criteria for meeting civilized status, right? And I try to demonstrate how the Native Americans met that criteria pretty darn well. All right. So, to this day, anthropology supports this theory of cultural evolution. There is a book that was like a big multi-award winning book called Sapiens, right? Like Homo sapiens. And it goes through this in the first couple chapters, this alleged cultural evolution that all societies, one time or another, go through, almost like rites of passage on their way to becoming modern. So, the first one, right, is manipulation of the environment. that you eventually leave the hunting and gathering stage in small bands, and you begin to cultivate certain crops, right? And then when you cultivate them, you're able to um, you're able to feed a much larger number of people. So now a much larger number of people can gather together in one village or town or city. Okay. But then as they're, all the work that's entailed in cultivation of the crops, you need, you're going to begin the process of becoming a complex society. And all that means is that you're beginning to become kind of stratified with different classes, some classes above others, and everyone kind of specializes in something. So, for instance, you're going to need your peasant farmers to do the backbreaking work of farming. You're going to need a um, a bureaucracy and a leadership that claims that they are the best. And oftentimes, in history, in ancient history, they would connect themselves to a deity, and claiming that they came literally from the gods or from one of their main gods. And Aristoi means the best in aristocracy, and so that's a fitting name. They form an aristocracy, and they dictate to the people and put them to work. And then with the vagaries of weather and the vagaries of the crop, you develop a religious elite, right? Of what we would call shaman, and the shaman are the intermediaries between man and the gods and the elements. And they go through different purification rites, sometimes through hallucinogenic trances, etc. And they try to go into the spirit realm and try to pacify the deities so that they'll bring plenty of rain and sunshine, etc., for the crops to grow well. But then you also run the risk of someone coming and attacking during harvest time and taking all the food that you have so arduously tried to cultivate. So you need an army. You need a standing army to be able to protect the crops and protect the people in the community, etc. And then, of course, the leaders are going to the aristocracy are going to dictate the allocation of the wealth of the resources, who gets what as far as access to food, the use of land, etc. Oftentimes, they're going to collect tribute or something akin to tax collecting from the people. And so now, kind of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Right? You first have to worry about your immediate physiological needs. You want to be safe. You want to have plenty of food and water. And then and only then, right, your endeavors can go to higher, more esoteric ventures. So, like for instance, now you could develop a literati of people who write poetry and develop a written language. People who engage in music, um, literature, art, sculpting, etc. Okay, so you develop that class. And then oftentimes you covet goods that are not found within your own realm. So then you develop a merchant class, right? Who they go and they purchase what's in high demand from another land, another civilization, and bring it back and sell it and offer it to your own people. So so at any rate, when you see, like when the Spaniards came to California, almost with the exception of the Chumash in Santa Barbara, virtually all the native California tribes were still hunter gatherers. And so did the Spaniards, right? They said, "Oh, these guys are primitive. They're like primitive little children. They haven't begun farming. They haven't developed a complex society. They haven't developed culture and art and music, writing." Um, and then also they haven't developed another criterion would be technology. Okay. So at any rate, looking at that, you see the actual term used in some of the places in Latin America by the Spaniards was tierra vacía, empty land, right? And some of the islands in the Caribbean were not, at the time of the arrival of Columbus and his men, were not inhabited. Some of the lands in South America, where the infamous Araucanian tribes uh, uh, rode horses and lived, almost a vaquero, a cowboy lifestyle. Uh, there were lands down there in Argentina and so forth, in the Argentine Pampas region, where there was no one inhabiting a lot of the land. And so they'd say, if the land is empty, then we have the rights to it, right? And the English, very similarly, their legal term was virgin soil. It hasn't been touched. It hasn't been used. Okay. But then, of course, they went further than that, right? And you had a guy named Sepulveda, who was a jurist, Jurist, and the jurists were lawyers and interpreters of the law. And Spain had the Siete Partidas constitution, and he contended, going back to them fighting the Moors, who had invaded in 711, invaded Spain, and they had coexisted with for centuries. He contended that if they are under a tyrannical rule and if they're under tyrannical rule and they're being taught immoral and pagan uh, culture and behavior and institutions, then the Spaniards have a right to declare holy war on them, or just war, as St. Augustine would call it, and put a more appropriate government over the people. But in this case, they're talking mainly about empty land. They're talking mainly about meek sheep, right? And yeah. So we start off here in refuting it with where it says historian James Wilson. First of all, right, as far as empty land, there were supposedly between 75 and 100 million inhabitants of the Americas, while all of Europe was comprised of only 70 million. So if that's true, the Americas were more densely inhabited by natives than Europe was by Europeans. Okay. Then as far as them being one monolithic group, because when the Spaniards came, right, they developed a condescending attitude toward Native Americans, because the first tribe they met were the Arawak in the Caribbean. And the Arawak, many of them were naked or just had small loincloths to wear. And so it reminded the Spaniards of Adam and Eve in the Bible, where it says that before they sinned and they were perfectly innocent, they were naked, but they didn't know it, right? Like a little child. And so to them, right, it was like pre-lapsarian innocence, like before the fall of Adam and Eve, this Arawak tribe. The Arawak swam out to their boat and they cut themselves on the swords of the Spaniards because they knew not metallurgy of any sort. They allowed the Spanish to dupe them with hawk bells and these other trifle little jewelry, and in return give them gold, as gold was found throughout Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Hispaniola in the Caribbean. And so for those reasons, right, and not only that, the Arawak immediately said, "Can you please protect us from the Caribs that the Caribbean's named after?" The Caribs were a much more warlike tribe, and they evidently engaged in cannibalism. So the Arawak, right from the get-go, developed a very paternalistic relationship with the Spanish. Like they were the child, and the Spaniards were their protectors and providers. Okay, and but we're reminded, right? There were so many different cultural groups, linguistic groups, that you can't even begin to lump them together. as one simple indigenous group of childlike hunter-gatherers. Not even close. Okay. So at any rate, then moving on, I start with the what they call the Neolithic or New Stone Tool or farming revolution. It says appears to date back as early as 9,500 to 3,000 years ago in present-day Mexico. All right. Tamaulipas, Mexico, they found evidence. They called them oftentimes the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. Corn, as you may know, is a hybrid man-made plant. They used primarily teosinte and maybe perhaps tripsicum grass to create it. And so let's see here. McNeish's partners deducted that by 5,400 years ago, inhabitants of the current state of Puebla, Mexico, derived at least 30% of their food intake from agriculture. Okay. And then let's go down, and I should have had I thought I did have like a comparison. Is Egypt, China, Mesopotamia. You're talking from 4 to 2000 BC, where they began farming. And so the Native Americans did very well, right? They fared very well. You see here, cotton, 5,000 years past. That'd be 3000 BC. All right. So as far as time and making this kind of comparison with fulfilling the requirements of civilized status, and notice, you guys, these requirements are subjective, right? They're our European and American Western notion of what constitutes civilized status, right? They're not etched in stone. So at any rate, yeah, I have some right here. For instance, he contends that Sumer in the Near East easily predated other old world sites and engaging in agriculture 11,000 years ago. I'm sorry, that even further back. While domestication of plants may have occurred in the Americas as long as 10,000 years ago. And remember also that the Europeans and the Asians and those in the Near East could piggyback off of one another through migration, trade, war, etc., right? All those types of contacts end up creating cultural syncretism, where you borrow, you take and give parts of your culture to one another. And the Native Americans are surrounded by two oceans. So the Native Americans did what they did on their own, without help from any other people of another continent. Right? So then between 1700 and 1200 BC, towns and ceremonial centers were established. So of course, the first one I think of are the Olmec, right? San Lorenzo and La Venta, with the big stone heads made of basalt, step pyramids, and they also had stelae. Stelae are stone monuments that have hieroglyphic writing on them. Oftentimes, the hieroglyphic writing gives historical accounts of what happened and when with certain kings, and mainly like coups and takeovers and wars and a rival king captured, etc. Those are usually captured on the stela. Okay. So you had fine sculpting, ornate pottery, terraced farming up hills on the sides of hills, a calendar and writing system that, of course, would be perfected by the Maya by 250 AD. Okay, so clearly they're engaging in cultural evolution. They had settled agriculture. They had a complex society of multiple classes. Okay. And then another group that I don't mention too much about is Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan later on will be associated with the Toltec, but the Toltec were not the original founders of the city, they don't think. But by 100 100 BC, Teotihuacan established its famous astronomically connected architecture, right? So it has the path of the dead, the pyramid of the sun, and pyramid of the moon, and they have pyramids that exactly line up at the highest rise at the planet Venus, with the planet Venus. They were able to predict eclipses. I mean, just impressive stuff in Teotihuacan. So much so that, from 100 BC, fast forward all the way to the 1400s AD, and the Aztec were still claiming heritage and connection to Teotihuacan. Okay. The Maya, right? I mean, the Maya were something else. So, they had areas hosting up to 50,000 inhabitants, okay, with agriculture, obviously, providing the food for that many people in one spot. Uh, their calendar is both pictographic and syllabic, which makes it more versatile. They had they changed their calendar um every 4 years, and it was the same as what we do. It's equivalent to what we do. Is that supposedly right? An average year is 365 and a quarter days, right? So every fourth year we have leap year, and turn it into February 29th. They had their own way of doing the same thing. So they were very accurate with their calendar. They had a number system that was able to deal in high numbers. You do the numbers at the bottom. A line is 5 and a dot is 1. So if you have a line with 3 dots over it, that'd be 8. And then you'd go from bottom to top, and you go above it, and you discern the number, right? And let's say it was a line and 2 dots, so that'd be 7, and you do 7 times 20 on the second level, and then the third level you do the number and times it by 20 times 20, or 400. So they were able to deal in very high numbers with their number system. They had a 2-tiered school system, the Aztec, one for the commoners and one for the nobles. The nobles were taught the famous codices. There are 4 codices that have been found from the Maya, and there are quite a few more than that found from the Aztec. And these are written books. These are written books with pictographic writing, and they have everything from mundane uh, uh, writings of tax revenue and who owed them money, etc., and just the state of their economics. And you had some that explained their culture, how they raised kids, how they punished children, what they expected of people as far as public behavior, and what the punishments were. And then, of course, they had some parts to their codices that were just history and telling the story of their past and the intrigues of their emperors, with emperors of other tribes, etc. It's really, really fascinating. And to this day, you could look up at local libraries and probably online different codices, or the singular is codex, and they're named after whoever first bought the rights to them. So there's like Codex Mendoza, Codex Ramirez, the Dresden Codex from Dresden, Germany. But real cool stuff. All right. The Aztec had drawbridges, an intricate water system, terraced farming, and they had the floating gardens. They had zoos. They had libraries. Okay, all this. Hernan Cortez was just his mouth just dropped when he came to Tenochtitlan and beheld it. All right. And then as far as present day US, most for the longest time, the chronologically first area to meet European criteria was a bit ironically in the very arid Southwest, the very dry Southwest. If you look up the Pueblo people, right, just generic for city, right? That's what the Spaniards named them because they had these pueblos. So you have Chaco Canyon, Pueblo Bonito, Casa Grande, Snaketown. They're amazing. If you wanted to look those up, Google them. You had these edifices uh, made of something akin to a combination of rock and cement, uh, of hundreds of rooms in one edifice. You had, again, streets and pyramids that are perfectly aligned with a couple of the constellations, with the planet Venus again. They could obviously knew when solar eclipses would happen and plan for them. And they even had an an astronomical tower there in New Mexico, uh, the Pueblo that is. And so, and of course, with scarce water, they had a very intricate canal and irrigation system for their farming. Okay. So then, however, the narrative may change, though, you guys, as far as the order, because then you have the Mississippian tribes up and down the Mississippi River. And for one reason is they are just learning about the Adena, Adena. So for instance, some mysterious stuff, right? You have burials of extremely tall, just anomalously tall and big kings with swastika marks on their sepulchers. Um, you have kilns, which provides evidence of smelting iron, and no one knew that the Native Americans knew any type of metallurgy, right? Besides mining, like just the natural rocks like quartz and jade and obsidian, and so forth, but nothing like creating, from charcoal coke, creating iron. So I think we're going to find more and more pretty soon about the Adena up and down the Mississippi River. But they have been linked back at least to the time of Christ, if not earlier. And so they may overtake the Pueblo as far as how early they got things established. And then you have Cahokia, but Cahokia wasn't established until oh goodness, like the 11 or 1200s AD. But it was a big part of the mound culture. And the mound culture, once again, had multiple classes, farming, thousands of inhabitants, etc. So that's just basically it. So see here, European conquerors wanted to justify dispossession of Native American lands by convincing the world and future generations that Native America was inhabited by small numbers of primitive, childlike natives who shared a common backward culture and lifestyle, far behind on humanity's cultural evolutionary path toward modernity. And I just said here, this simply is not true. All right. And then number three, this one makes me wince a little bit because now you're dealing with stereotypes, okay? But I will say that if you point to any region in the United States and in Mesoamerica, Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, okay, parts of Honduras, if you look to those areas, you're gonna find uh, at least some tribes that are characterized like as such. Okay, and so what I'm contending is many of them shared certain religious principles and practices that are going to elicit. And I'm not saying that's okay. I'm not saying that that was right. I'm just saying it is what it is. It happened just the same, whether we like it or not. That it elicited the disdain of the Europeans, so that the Europeans began to look down upon the Native Americans in a kind of condescending way. So, for instance, right, that with their religion is you have certain things that went directly against the Bible. All right. So, for instance, the Texcali polka, um, the war god of the Mexica of the Aztec, he actually was, and even in their own pantheon, he was the evil twin of Quetzalcoatl. Okay, um, they worshipped the planet Venus, contending that Quetzalcoatl had risen from being killed in the underworld, uh, and he had risen up into the sky and resurrected into the planet Venus as the son of the morning star. And in the Bible, the book of Isaiah says that, "Oh, how you have fallen, Lucifer, oh son of the morning star." And so, you know, the to the Spaniards, this big deal with Venus in the morning star was demonic to them, right? And then, needless to say, um, when Cortez was invited by Montezuma II to come into his temple to Tezcatlipoca, it was filled with black vipers or snakes. And as you know, Satan went into the form of a snake in the Garden of Eden. And so uh, Cortez is going to tell him, this is according to Castillo's account, and who was there side by side with Cortez. And according to Castillo, Cortez said, you know, Moctezuma, you seem like such a well-mannered and upright man. Certainly, you know that you are worshiping the devil, and that this is not the true God. And then, of course, that began uh, a source of tension between Moctezuma and Cortez. But at any rate, so you have that. You also have, let's see here, human sacrifice and cannibalism, right? Clearly, the Catholic or Protestant Euro Americans coming here were not okay with human sacrifice. Okay, and then you had the shaman, and the fact that the shaman would go through hallucinogens um, and try to contact spirits of the dead and so forth. To the Catholic and Protestant Christians, right? That was sorcery, that was witchcraft, and that was not to be done. That was playing with the devil. And then, of course, their idea of pantheism, that the Great Spirit is in everything, even in inanimate objects like rocks, you know, stones, etc. That was silly to the Euro Americans. And then also in New Mexico, in particular, the Navajo, part of their cult of fertility and rain pertained to sex. They had actually engaged in sexual acts during their religious rituals. And so you can imagine the Franciscan Spanish friars, the monks, they were like, you know, ay Dios mío, you guys can't do that anymore. And so they tried to lash down on the Navajo engaging in sexual religious practices. Right. So at any rate, then in addition to that, so we have shamanism, Then I go from religion to a second reason for which the Euro-Americans began to look down upon the Native Americans, and that is their different notions of land ownership, right? That to a large extent, the Native American notion of land ownership was very similar to the European notion of usufruct. And usufruct means you have the right to exploit that land, to use it, but you're not the boss of it. You're not the owner of it. You just get to use it. And then, of course, with the notion of proprietorship, then it's your land. You're the boss, you're the owner, etc. So there were many occasions upon which, with the Spanish, with the Dutch, with the French, with the English, where they'd come in and there would be a misunderstanding, whereby the natives would say, "Sure, use that land. Go ahead, come in here, use that land." And then they would tell them, "Okay, that's good now. Now you must leave." And the Europeans were like, "No, you gave it to us. We own it." And so that was just one more uh, part of contention between the Native Americans and the Europeans. And the Europeans thought that, the idea of no one being able to truly own Mother Earth, but just simply use what she offers, they didn't respect that principle. Okay. And then another thing is that the Native Americans could have really used leverage with land, first and foremost. In the case of the Spanish, with gold that they possessed, and also with their labor. And they could have made high demands with the Europeans coveting those things. But in hindsight, the Spaniards especially wrote, almost boasted, that the natives were easily taken advantage of, that they all too easily and quickly surrendered their land, surrendered their gold, etc. It didn't use that leverage that they had very well. Right. So for those reasons, I say the Europeans began to look down upon the Native Americans and have, again, kind of a paternalistic, condescending view of them, that they were like childlike and savage and backward, and they knew what was best for them. All right. All right. So now what I want to do, because anybody have any questions or comments? Right. What might be due by next Tuesday, uh, I just want you to take a look at the Aztec one. This one's different, okay? And that there's not a definitive overarching thesis. This is more just informative than it is argumentative. But what I want you to do is just consider these questions here. Why should present-day Latinos be proud of their indigenous heritage? Compare and contrast Aztec society with contemporary American society. How do you foresee early modern Spanish Catholic estimation of Aztec society and why? All right. So I'll tell you what, this information almost comes completely from their codices, right? Those books of hieroglyphics that they wrote. A guy named Bernardino de Sahagún got a group of young Aztec boys, and he had them converted to Catholic Christianity. He had them taught the Castilian Spanish language. And because they were nobles, they knew what every hieroglyphic meant. and they wrote beside the hieroglyphics in Castilian Spanish the meaning of each picture. And then, of course, from that Spanish, it's been translated to a myriad of languages, including English. Okay. So at any rate, when they put this together, Bernardino de Sahagún, interesting guy. Okay. Um, he's going to have a famous quote that you'll see soon, whereby he believed that the devil was blinding the Aztec into sacrificing humans, especially children, and into thinking that they had to do such. And he said we shouldn't blame the Aztec. It's the devil who's blinded them into making them feel as if they must do such an infernal deed. And so clearly he wanted them to be converted. Okay. So that sounds, right away a bit ethnocentric. However, he was adamant that he wanted these codices to exist for future humanity to be able to read about and understand and appreciate the history and culture of the Aztec. Because believe it or not, there were some bishops and friars and royal officials who were trying to burn these codices because they said they were pagan. All right. So Sahagún was a big fan of this. And when he read the information that I provided here and much more, he was impressed. He was impressed with many facets of the Aztec culture and history. All right. So, you have here at the top the rags to riches story, them coming from a land of the is it the cranes, Las Garzas? I can't remember what kind of bird that is. But at any rate, this original homeland was called Aztlan, right? And they came southeast from it down into the Valley of Mexico. So to this day, right, and during the Chicano movement in the 60s, they connected that and said perhaps that Aztlan was in present Southwest United States, their fabled homeland. So they were told by their god, Huitzilopochtli, that they were to stop at a place that was underwater, swampy, that had where they would see an eagle on a cactus clutching a serpent, and hence the Mexican flag. All right, and that was at Lake Texcoco. They were under a guy named Tezozomoc. They were mercenaries for him. And when the time got right, they broke free and rebelled against him, teamed up with two other tribes, and formed a tripartite monarchy. But it didn't take long, and the Aztec took over the other two tribes. Their morals, right? When you look at the story of their deities, they intend to convey, lessons, messages, no different from the Bible. And so hence, what are some of the characteristics that are really highlighted? One, for sure, from what I've put together and read, is humility instead of pride and arrogance. The legend stated that the Aztecs said we're in the fifth sun, that 4 times something like humanity has been created and then destroyed by the gods, and we're in the fifth time around. And at the beginning of the fifth, that the gods themselves met at Teotihuacan, and they created a great fire, and they said whichever gods are willing to throw themselves into that fire, they shall rule as the sun. And no one was willing to do it, except for a very lowly, humble deity named Nanahuatzin. And so Nanahuatzin selflessly sacrifices himself, and he's rewarded as becoming the sun. But then man must honor Nanahuatzin and keep him in the sky by being sacrificed, sacrificing his own blood. And so hence the human sacrifice. And so even when you look at the human sacrifice of the Aztec, you have components that you can relate to Spanish Catholicism. Humility over pride. I mean, my goodness, the Bible is all about that. Self-sacrifice, right? And perseverance. What else you have? Also the need to be shrewd. I wouldn't necessarily put that with the Bible, but I still think that that is I don't know, that's commendable. They some of their revered gods were trickster gods, and they always seem to trick the gods who are full of themselves and arrogant and prideful and ready for the fall. Right? So like the hero twins going down into the underworld, Mictlan, the Maya called it Shabalba, and tricking the gods during a couple of the ball games that they played. Also, another thing is noblesse oblige. Is the Aztec were really into um, the nobleman's obligation, that the nobility lived a more comfortable life, but therefore the nobility were the ones who trained the most vigorously in military combat, and they were expected to lead the commoners in combat. They were expected to protect the commoners of the city or the village, and punishments for certain vices were more severe on noblemen than they were on commoners, because, of course, the noblemen should have known better with their education in school, etc. So, for instance, you have uh, public drunkenness, adultery, um, premarital sex, a lot of these things that go hand in hand with the Spanish Catholics, the were punished amongst the Aztec. Defiance of your parents. They had several ways of punishing their children, and yeah, like I said, a lot of things. I think Bernardino de Sahagún read and was impressed by, was generally impressed by. And of course, they knew the astronomical knowledge, uh, uh, using the Mayan calendar, etc. Yeah, and then this is the part where Sagun blames Satan for them executing their children. And that, if you wanted to look at it in the Spanish, that's in the Spanish. But now, see, going on to Aztec morality. Obedient and honest. They used discretion. They were for modesty and humility. They were against overindulgence in sleeping and in eating and in drinking. And they were for moderation. So a lot of this ties in with, Aristotle, his golden mean, right, of moderation and European thought. Then notice on 3 is they also had a very a resignation to the difficulty of life. They supposedly train their children from a young age that basically life is going to be brutal, and you might as well face it. You might as well gracefully uh, endure it because it's going to come whether you want it to or not. And they were really into public honor. Like I said, especially if you debased yourself by becoming publicly drunk, they would severely punish you for that. And sometimes, not to be stereotypical, but when a lot of times when they talk about neatness and cleanliness, uh, humility, being diligent and hardworking, and not being boastful, and living up for your family's honor. It reminds me of Japanese history, of what I've read. Lying, theft, and treason. Adulterers and homosexuals were punished. Slanderers. And they wanted to ensure that their judges were impartial and did not show any favoritism to the rich. So anyway, it goes on and on. Now I talk about the schools. But what I want to ask of you is just consider on number 2 on this second assignment. Um, you can go any direction you want, but in one way, like I said, you could go in the direction of Sahagún and note similarities with the Spanish, similarities with us today, with Christianity, etc., and all that would seem rather impressive to a European American. You can look for things that you think are just uniquely Latino, and mention those things. Or you could focus upon the differences. Clearly, there were differences as well from modern society, from the Spaniards. Keeping time as context. Notice, just like the Spanish, you could improve your status either through the priestly schools, through religion, or through military achievement. And that was the same for the Spanish. But they were imperialistic. They took over other tribes during what they were called flower wars. They would yeah, this is the same as the last assignment. I apologize. This isn't supposed to be a part of it. Don't worry about the bottom part, okay? Because it should look familiar to you. It's in assignment number 1. I don't know why I connected it to this. So this ends here with number 12. Okay. So are there any questions or comments? You guys feel okay about this stuff? Más o menos? All right, you guys. Well, that's it for today, for this week, okay? Thank you. I have your names down. And if you guys don't have any other questions, any questions or comments, I'll go ahead and let you go. But good luck on the first 2 assignments, okay? Thank you.